Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to today's Globinar on Global Supply Chain, East Coast Ports and Challenges and Path Forward. My name is Mi-Jung Hibet. I'm the Executive Director of the Global Chamber, Baltimore and Washington, D.C. chapter. I'm very excited about the particular topic of the conversation that we're going to have today. For those of you who don't know Global Chamber as of yet, Global Chamber is the first chamber of commerce focusing on helping companies and communities grow cross-metro and cross-border trade and investment around the world. We have a presence in 525 metro regions in more than 195 countries, and the number of metros joining in the chamber is growing. Global Chamber headquarters and different metros are holding events on various topics that help our exporters and importers, service providers, and other members grow in doing cross-border business. So before jumping into the program, first I'd like to recognize a few folks here. Today's Globinar is a little bit different and a little bit special in a way that it is a cross-metro event as well as a hybrid event. So 3 great Global Chamber metros have been collaborating for this event. And I'd like to thank my colleagues, Susan Asadi, Executive Director of the Global Chamber New York, and Lynette Robinson, Executive Director of the Global Chamber of Miami, for this wonderful collaboration. Also, I'd like to recognize and thank our 2 in-person location sponsors, Emo Trends here in Columbia, Maryland, where I am right now, and Corpay in New York City, where our panelists are joining from. So thank you very much, Steve Shine, branch manager of Emo Trends, as well as today's moderator, and Andrew Howlett, director of strategic partnership and global payments, foreign exchange specialist at Corpay, for hosting in-person segment of this event. So today we are here to learn and discuss about one of the most critical issues that are affecting almost all businesses in the United States, and thus the nation's economy in a major way. That is the global supply chain issue. From the baby formula shortage to semiconductor chip shortages for cars and computers, these days the vulnerability of the supply chain has been elevated to one of economic security in the United States. Shortages, delays, bottleneck, and backlog, and frustration. Those are the words that we hear almost every day from media in related to supply chain. So why is the supply chain broken, and what needs to be done in order for us to ensure it can meet and serve evolving supply needs of businesses in the 21st century? Today, we would like to hear perspectives, particularly from the major ports on the East Coast, which are the pivotal links in supply chain as they are facilitating the movement of goods from ships to shelves. We also want to explore if there are alternatives in the East Coast ports that can help alleviate congestions and backlog at the ports of LA and others on the West Coast. So with that, first I'd like to introduce today's keynote speaker. It is my greatest honor to introduce Senator Ben Cardin of the state of Maryland to everyone. First elected to the Senate in 2006, Senator Cardin currently serves as chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, which is on the forefront of rebuilding our economy. Senator Cardin is also a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations, Finance, Environment, and Public Works Committees. He understands the importance of building secure, resilient supply chain and has been a great supporter for the Port of Baltimore to expand its capacity and further strengthening its role as a critical international gateway that connects the U.S. to global markets. So without further ado, I'd like to yield the floor to Senator Ben Cardin. Senator Ben Cardin.
Well, Mi-Jung, first of all, thank you so much for allowing me to join you at this critical moment in this discussion about the supply chain challenges on the East Coast of the United States. First, let me give my commercial for the state of Maryland. I'm very proud to represent the state of Maryland in the United States Senate along with Senator Van Hollen. We recognize that the Port of Baltimore represents an economic engine for our state. 15,000 direct jobs, 140,000 indirect jobs related to the Port of Baltimore. We're proud of the numbers on the port. They've done extremely well. We're the largest e-commerce port. That says something about the future of our port being in a very healthy situation. We're the 8th largest with U.S. cargo, the 11th largest on tonnage, and number 1 for the 10th year in a row on auto roll-on, roll-off. So it is a port that is extremely active. It has had challenges, but has done extremely well in growth, even during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's helped by its location. 1/3 of the U.S. households are within distance of our port. It's an inland port, which makes it a little bit easier for products to reach their final destinations and for exports to reach the ships for export. We have, as a state, invested heavily in our port. We are prepared to meet the challenges of the future. Recently, we were able to get funds to replace a 126-year-old Howard Street tunnel. I mention that because that was no easy task. We got those funds before the bipartisan infrastructure bill was enacted. That will allow us to replace an old bridge that old tunnel that prevented double stacking of rail cargo, which was a bottleneck on the East Coast of the United States. I mention that because in order to deal with the supply chain issues, we have to invest in infrastructure, and we have done that. We've done that at the Port of Baltimore. We have the new Panamax cranes, 4 that were put in. We can handle the large cargo ships coming through the Panama Canal. We're now in the process of putting another 50-foot berth in our port in Baltimore. We have invested. We got really good news in the Water Resources Development Act, the WRDA Act, in that we are now starting construction of Mid-Bay. Now, Mid-Bay will be the second of our environmental restoration for dredge material sites so that we can keep our port dredged at the appropriate level without political controversy as to where we can put dredge material. And we're doing it in a way that we have beneficial use of our dredge material, which helps us in our environmental commitments to the Chesapeake Bay. I say that because this is a port that has its future well situated. But we have challenges, as all ports have challenges, as the United States has challenges on the supply chain issues. Yes, we've seen that the supply chain has been disrupted, and it really presents a dilemma for us. We believe in globalization, but we recognize that when we're dependent upon sources that are under autocratic government control, those sources can become unreliable. So the first thing that we need to do is have resiliency in our supply chain sources. We need diversity. And the legislation that's currently in conference, the USICA bill, or the America Competes Act, depending on whether you want to use the House term or the Senate term for the bill, allows us to build resiliency in our supply chains to deal with one of the issues that you mentioned, John, and that is, how do we deal with having adequate semiconductors in this country? We recognize that we believe in globalization, but we don't want to be held hostage by any other supply source outside of our control. So we have to be able to have a more diversified supply chain in order to meet these goods. As I mentioned, our port is critically important for auto on-off. Well, if you don't have semiconductors, you're not going to have autos. So we need to make sure that we have an adequate supply of semiconductors. Labor, real serious problem. Where are we going to get the workforce to meet the needs? We don't have enough workers in the United States. We don't have enough workers in Maryland. We don't have enough trained workers. So we really need to invest in immigration reform, in allowing more people to the natural flow to come into this country legally. We need to do that. We need to invest in job training. And that's also part of a reliable supply chain. And then we have to recognize that we can't have dependency on autocratic countries. What Russia is doing in Ukraine threatens not just Ukraine, it threatens every democratic state in the world. Europe might be the front line, but we're not far behind in risk factors to our democratic system and our free market type economy. So Russia today needs to be isolated. That causes us supply chain challenges, and that's why we need diversity and supply side challenges. We can't be naive to say we're going to have open markets with countries that want to use their economics as a weapon against us. And that's exactly what Russia is doing in using energy as a weapon against Ukraine and Europe. And we can't be naive about China. China wants to determine the rules of engagement, and they're not a market economy. And they want to control and steal intellectual property. We can't be naive about this. We need to be able to establish rules that allow us to have global commerce, but under rules that are fair for all to play in a market economy. I was just recently in Japan. They're very anxious for us to get more engaged in the Asia Pacific region. The president's initiative in the Asia Pacific economic framework is a way that we can expand opportunities. We got to build on that. We got to build on more globalization and more diversified sources. That's going to be critically important for our economic growth, for Maryland, the East Coast, for the entire country. And we need to work together in order to make sure that we have reliable supply sources for our country. Invest in infrastructure. The bipartisan infrastructure bill was a major accomplishment. It's going to provide in my state over $6 billion of resources to modernize our infrastructure. All that's going to be important to make sure that we have reliable supply chains. It's critically important for our economic growth. So I recognize we have severe challenges. We're paying a heavy price for energy today. We got to work on that. We need to have friendlier energy sources. And we need to wean ourselves off of energy sources from Russia and autocratic countries. And with that, I'll turn it back to you and tell you that we are looking forward to working together so that the entire East Coast can do well. But if you have to choose one port, choose the Port of Baltimore.
Senator Cardin, thank you very much for your great remarks. And I understand that you have a very busy schedule today, so we'd like to just ask just one or two questions before we start the panel discussions. Well, earlier this year, you mentioned a lot of initiatives and legislative in terms of dealing with this supply chain issues. Earlier this year, the White House unveiled its plan to revitalize American manufacturing and secure critical supply chains in 2020. So is Congress supporting of that approach, administration's approach? And are there going to be really tangible next step we should expect in terms of any policies or legislation?
Well, clearly, the administration and Congress need to work together on the supply chain challenges. There's not one answer to this. We recognize that. We recognize there are certain products that are limited in our sourcing as to where we can get those products. We got to be smart about transparency and openness and recognize that we have to have multiple sources where we can, and we have to not participate in geopolitics, which is against our national security interest. So yes, the administration is working with us. They're working with us in regards to the bill that's in conference that we hope to report out by the end of this calendar year, probably by the end of this fiscal year. We'd like to get it done. That will shore up our supply. They are very supportive of building a much stronger domestic production on semiconductors. They're much with us in building our own healthcare infrastructure so that we're not dependent on pandemics for sourcing that can be unreliable and the quality can be suspect. Yes, we're working very closely with the administration.
Thank you very much for that. Lastly, aside from the supply chain issue, Senator, as the chair of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, what are you doing to help small businesses find new opportunities in our global business environment? As you know, Global Chamber is a member-supported organization, and we have a makeup of a lot of small business, medium-sized businesses as members.
Well, thank you for that question. You are correct. It's one of my top priorities as the chair of the Small Business Committee. We recognize that innovation and job growth occurs at the greatest amount with smaller companies, these startup companies that have a better idea on how to do something. They have the creativity, but it's challenging for them to figure out how to get into markets, particularly overseas markets. So we do provide resource partners through the Small Business Administration and through the programs that they have that can help smaller companies get through the challenges of international trade. We have that at the state level, we have it at the federal level. We also have it through partnership programs under the SBIR program, the STTR programs, through Department of Defense and other agencies. We are working very closely with small companies to get them access to foreign markets. When we negotiate trade agreements, and if you look at the USMCA agreement, there's a separate chapter for small businesses. We want our trade agreements to be very sensitive to the needs of small businesses, using de minimis rules to help small companies gain access to foreign markets without the cost factors that are usually associated with international commerce. So we have an overall strategy to increase dramatically market access for smaller companies in America. We do that at the local level, we do it at the national level, and we have national policies that help.
Thank you very much, Senator Cardin. So again, if we have some more questions, would you mind for us to actually send the questions to your office so that
sure.
It can be addressed later on?
Not a problem at all. And again, thank you for having this forum, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you again, and then thank you for your leadership on Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
So now we will start our panel discussion. Let me first introduce today's moderator, Steve Shine. As mentioned earlier, Steve Shine is the branch manager of the EMO Trans, a global transportation and logistics service provider, which has 26 operational offices in the US with a total of 85 offices in 21 countries and 250 plus network offices in 120 countries covering 6 continents. Steve has a great depth of experience in the field of international and domestic logistics, as well as experience in domestic and international manufacturing, sourcing, purchasing, and production planning. So thanks, Steve, for leading today's panel discussion. And now we have 3 representatives from 3 major ports on the East Coast of the panel. Panelists will be introduced by Susan and Lanier, Executive Director of the Collaborating Metros. After each representative's presentation, Steve will ask 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll proceed to full panel discussion. Just a few household items. Anyone who wants to ask questions, you will have the opportunity to ask them at the end during the Q&A session. But we encourage you to put your questions directly in the chat box. Then I will pass them along to Steve so he can ask them directly to the speakers. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Susan Asadi for her to introduce the speaker from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey.
Thank you very much, Mi-Jong. This is very exciting, and you know, we have some great speakers in the room. It was terrific to hear the senator. I think that's the first time I've been on a global chamber meeting when, you know, we've had a senator as a part of this chapter. So thank you. So it's my pleasure to introduce Nicole Polidoro. She's the Northeast Regional Account Manager, Port Department of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. She joined the Port Authority in November 2019. She works in the department's Business Development Industry Relations Division, and she's responsible for managing relationships with port users and customers to promote the ports, as well as enhance the existing customer experience. She's also on the advisory board for the Global Chamber New York City chapter. So it's my pleasure now to hand it off to you, Nicole, and Cesar should be managing your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah, thank you so much to the Global Chambers, you know, having this webinar. I think it's a great idea to have, you know, major ports discuss what we're seeing these days. And, you know, I'm excited to tell you what we're doing here in the Port of New York and New Jersey. So Cesar, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so this is the layout of our land. We're a landlord port model, so we're a little bit different than some of the ports. So we own the land and we lease it out to different tenants along the way. And We're the largest port on the East Coast. We're third largest in the nation. We have 3,000 acres of waterfront property in which the 6 marine terminals sit on. As you can see, we have Port Newark Container Terminal coming southbound. It's MAR Terminals and APM in Elizabeth. Across the channel, we have GCT in Staten Island. We have GCT Bayonne, New Jersey, and Red Hook Container Terminals. All operate on their own and essentially compete, but work together to make this gateway very fluid. Next slide, please. As Baltimore Senator said, you know, we are in the capital of commerce on hitting the most consumer reach. We have 6 major terminals, as I just reviewed. We have 51 weekly services coming into these ports, 45 weekly calls, 35 first port calls, 7 port lasts. We have 8.98 million TEUs in 21, which is a record high for the Port of New York and New Jersey. We have rail connections on all of our facilities so we can get cargo out to the Midwest and northbound into Canada. So it makes this gateway really important, as majority of our cargo leaving this gateway is the truck community. So 134 million consumer we can reach in 36 hours. Can you go to the next slide, please? This shows a better access to our consumer. You know, you can see in the very dark blue is our hour reach. We can hit 13 million customers in 1 hour. In 2 hours, we can reach 27 million, and just a 4 hour, 46.3. So it's important that we have this gateway fluid, moving, and this is just truck numbers. So it's a lot of truckers coming in and out of these gateways. Next slide, please. Besides containers, we do more. We have 3 auto processors, 2 cruise terminals. Now that COVID is, you know, slowing down, we're starting to see a cruise, you know, activity happen, and that's part of our role. Our role is to move cargo and people. So cruise terminals are important for us. We have various bulk and break bulk cargoes, and, you know, including some of the scrap metal, Belgian blocks, edible oils, orange juice, and cement. We handle some project cargo, and we have some heavy lift capacity. We have a New York, New Jersey cross harbor car float operation, which takes cargo from the New Jersey side into Brooklyn that can take some of these truckers off the road. It stays on the rail car, comes over, and then they can, on the other side, unload, transload them and get them to the Brooklyn area or beyond. Warehousing and distribution, most important, probably our buzzwords now, right? We're seeing a bottleneck into these terminals, into this gateway. We want to work with our warehousing distribution centers to get these boxes off these terminals and into their final destinations. Next slide, please. What's important too is the rail, you know, which the shift of a lot of cargo waiting to be unloaded and loaded in LA and Long Beach, and with their ILA, you know, negotiations going on, we're seeing more here. And we want to be able to have access to get the cargo, not just to our local consumer, but into the Midwest as well. We have 4 on-dock express rail facilities serving 6 marine terminals, 2 Class 1 railroads, CSX and Norfolk Southern. We have a capacity of 1.5 million rail lifts to over 50 destinations. We are seeing a trend of the ocean carriers aren't providing so much of an inland, so we see the rail numbers are going down, but we are prepared when that turns up again and the inland are able to get through this, you know, through a through bill through their customers, that we can be able to accommodate the customers moving into the Midwest and even essentially out to LA. Next slide, please. So behind the numbers, why were we seeing this? You know, the economic drivers, there was a strong retail. Right when COVID hit, everyone stayed home. They purchased everything. You know, you had to work from home. You built a home office. Your kids were home. You built school, you know, a classroom for them. You redid your backyard. You built pools. There was money they had that they were spending, and the supply chain just got boggled on this hard supply, you know, this hard demand from them. You know, heavy, and what on the supply chain drivers, it was an inventory report. You know, the major shippers were worried, instead of just in time, we're going to order just in case we run out. And again, that bogged up some of these gateways that you're seeing. Next slide, please. So some of the challenges, you know, every terminal, I mean, every gateway across is feeling this, you know, terminal capacity. You cannot build land. If anyone is in the New York area and you run down that turnpike and you see, you know, the terminals on one side of Newark Airport, we don't have land. You know, we're using all the land that we can. So we're trying to think outside that box. How can we move more cargo through this gateway without building land that is needed? Equipment inventory, very important. You need equipment to move the cargo, chassis. warehouse space. Our team has a group that is working on outreach into the facilities in the area that can help us get these boxes that are full container loads out onto warehouses off of the terminals to get the other vessels coming in behind it. Empty containers. I mean, I feel like it's a buzzword that's like a nightmare. If there are so many empty containers at every terminal. So we are working on pulling those off to give more space for cargo coming in behind it. And infrastructure of land usage. Again, we try to think outside the box. How can we utilize the land that we currently have to accommodate the cargo that's coming into this gateway? Like I said in the beginning, we are a landlord port. So we have to work collaboratively with our terminal operators. And those 6 marine terminal operators, they are great. Even though they compete, they work together to make this gateway fluid. And they are making on their each terminal, making great improvements, buying bigger cranes that can handle more cargo, making sure that they're fluent, new gate hours, appointment systems, things that make this gateway not have any stop, and we can continue serving our consumers. Next slide. Again, my name is Nicole Polidoro. I'm with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. This is my team, and we can share the slide deck when we're done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicole. I think, Stephen, now you have a couple of questions for Nicole.
Yes, first I want to express my appreciation to share space with not only Senator Cardin, but also this great panel from New York and Jacksonville and Virginia, Norfolk, as well as the Global Chamber colleagues. This is a great opportunity for everyone to learn more and to help adapt in unprecedented times. We are an international freight forwarder, and so we have been experiencing this supply chain disruptions for the last 2.5 years, along with the rest of you. We interact daily with all of these ports that we're talking to today. So I am as well am very interested in learning from these great resources. So to start, great presentation from New York. Wanted to ask a couple of questions. The first, as you mentioned, the number one most difficult part of the supply chain right now is it gets to the port, but then what? Where are the truckers? Where are the warehouses? And where is the labor? You did mention some improvements in infrastructure, but what other outside of the box improvements can you make in infrastructure in New York, New Jersey to help with these particular stopping points along the way?
Sure.
And what help do you need from other sources?
Thank you. In 2014, we put a port master plan together. It was going to give our ideas a roadmap to 2050. When COVID hit, we were doing numbers projected in this port master plan for 2026. So infrastructurally, we were not ready. Some improvements that we are working on, roadways are really important to get into and out of the terminals and the gateways. So we are working, the Port Authority itself, on the land and making improvements on how to get into the terminals and out of the terminals. Now, again, being a landlord port, each marine terminal operator are making improvements on each of their own terminals. They are improving by buying bigger cranes to handle the bigger vessels coming in. They are working on different ways to navigate their terminal and to get cargo off there as fast as they can in order for the new vessels to come into the gateway. So just collaboration is really important through this gateway to speak to each terminal, see how we can work on things. Our team is working on finding warehouse space and an empty return depot to get these empties off the terminal instead of getting shut out and more cargo can come in. Because currently right now, there are so many empties on the terminal that we cannot bring in full container loads. And like you said, there's a lot of reasons why there's a bottleneck here. It could be labor at the warehouse. It could be they have too much inventory and they have no space to put it at their warehouse. So they are using these terminals as a storage facility. We cannot have that. That does not make a facility and a terminal fluent. We need to try to help and get these boxes off. So we work with a lot of our stakeholders, a lot of our tenants to find ways to improve and get some of these, containers off of this terminal.
Okay, great. That's a really informative answer. I appreciate that. I'm going to say let's move on to the next port. We're a bit behind in schedule, but very much appreciate your comments and thank you very much.
Thank you.
And next will be Susan introducing the next port.
Thank you, Stephen. I appreciate it. Hi, Tara. How are you?
Hi, doing great. How are you?
Thank you. Tara Imam is the Senior Manager of Strategic Accounts for the Port of Virginia. She's an accomplished international supply chain professional with more than 15 years of industry experience. She started her career working for 2 logistics companies, which I can't pronounce, where she had responsibilities covering import-export operations, ocean contract negotiations, and sales. So she joined the Port of Virginia in 2018, and now, as I said earlier, she's a Senior Manager for Strategic Accounts. So make sure everybody mutes their telephones. I just heard a phone ring. Without further ado, if Cesar could cue up Tara's presentation, we'll get going with your talk about the Port of Virginia. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much for the opportunity. You can go right into the next slide. Perfect. So wanted to start off with just kind of giving a lay of the land, and my presentation is going to be a little bit different than Nicole's. She did a great job kind of overlaying everything that's going on, the challenges that we're seeing. We're all experiencing the same things. So what I wanted to try to focus on a little bit is what makes the Port of Virginia the Port of Virginia. So kind of highlight some differences about us along the way. So first, just looking at the lay of the land here, you'll see that on the bottom right there, you have Hampton Roads, and that is where our 4 marine terminals are. You have 2 main container terminals. That's Virginia International Gateway and Norfolk International Terminals. And then Newport News and Fort Smith are your out of gauge project terminals. Something that makes us a little bit different, if you go a little bit and you follow those logos, you have Richmond Marine Terminal, and that is a barge service. So your mother vessel would call into Hampton Roads, the containers would discharge and then get on a barge, go up the James River and arrive into Richmond. And then at the top of the map there, you have the Virginia Inland Port that's up in Front Royal. So we were the first port to successfully open an inland port that is serviced via the NS rail. So same idea, come off the mother vessel, jump on the NS rail and head up to Front Royal. That's a 5-day-a-week train. So, and it arrives the following day. So it's a very reliable service. To Nicole's point, she did mention that the ocean carriers have been a little bit selective in giving these bills for these inland ports. So one thing that we are working on our side as well is the ability to do direct bill, so that customers could come to us, the port, and say, hey, I want to go to Richmond, I want to go to the inland port. You would get just a port bill of lading with your ocean carrier to Norfolk, and then we would take it the rest of the way. So that's not out just yet, but just something that we have in the works. You can go to the next slide. So something that our CEO has kind of coined is the Virginia model. And again, this talks a little bit about what makes us us. So starting at the top there, you have Port Authority. Amongst all else, above everything else, we are a Port Authority. Going to the left there, Marine Terminals Operator. So different than other ports, we are an operating port. We're not a landlord port. So all those terminals that I just mentioned on the previous screen all fall under the Port of Virginia umbrella. So what that means is there's no competing economic interest there. It's one voice, it's one chief operating officer, it's one customer service team, it's one reservation system. So it makes everything much more streamlined for our customers, for our ocean carrier partners, and for us internally. If we need to make any kind of shifts or pull levers, we're able to do that a lot more effectively and efficiently because we don't have so many different pieces of red tape across the board. So when it comes to expanding our operating hours or doing changes to our reservation system, we can do that as needed. Going down to technology integrator. So as a port, we are the most technologically advanced port in the United States. There are other terminals, but as a whole port, we are the most technologically advanced. We do have our trucker reservation system that's in place at both Virginia International Gateway and Norfolk International Terminals, which is those two main marine container terminals. And with that, there's also semi-automation at both of those terminals. So through the past influx of all this cargo we've seen, even last month, May was a record-setting month for the port again. We've remained relatively fluid through everything that's been going on. And a lot of that is because of the technology that we have in place. We do have that semi-automation, we have that reservation system, and it all just works hand in hand in helping us be very efficient. Scooting further over, intermodal chassis pool and kind of assets and equipment, I'll lump that together. We do own and operate our own equipment, including our own chassis pool. So we are currently the only port that owns and operates our own true gray chassis pool. Charleston's coming on board with that model as well. But this is something that has been very unique to the Port of Virginia and very successful. Chassis, amongst all the challenges, have been a big one. We recognize that a little bit ahead, and we put in a very large order to actually increase our fleet by 40%. And as Senator was saying, kind of looking at kind of splitting up your sourcing. So we did half of our orders from Thailand, and we actually have half of them being US manufactured. So kind of trying to split that up as well. And those will all be in by the end of this year. So increasing our fleet by 40%, which we desperately need to get those in. We've seen a big challenge is the dwell, the container dwell off terminal is at currently about 17 days still, which is extremely excessive. So that's tying up a lot of those chassis. And we understand, like Nicole mentioned, it's a snowball effect of what's going on here. But the sooner we get those chassis in, the better that it will be. Next slide. So when I mentioned the semi-automation, I realize a lot of people might not know exactly where that falls within the terminal. So in looking at this picture, the major turquoise cranes that you kind of see in the middle of the picture there, that's your yard equipment. That's what's actually shuffling and moving those containers in the stacks. That's where you have your semi-automation in play. So those are all being run by just algorithms being put into our operating systems. You can go by 24/7 and you will see those guys moving and repositioning those containers to be in their optimal position for when your truckers are coming in the morning. Whoever is coming in for that 5 a.m. appointment, his container is on the top and ready to go. We do have ILA who still participates. So they are now just, instead of sitting in a cab on top of that crane, they're sitting in a nice air-conditioned, temperature-controlled room. They've got some remote controls, and the last 10 feet for that container going on a chassis or off, they're taking over and they're manually doing that process. We do still have ILA that are in the ship-to-shore cranes. So we found that that is a big place where we definitely still want and need human interaction. But for that yard equipment, that's where you have the semi-automation. And next slide. So the last slide here that really kind of talks about what makes us different on the East Coast is we are very big on sustainability. So really pushing the barge, pushing the rail. We actually just announced that we will be net zero carbon emissions by 2040. That's for scope 1 and 2. And also by 2032, pretty aggressive, that we will be powered by 100% clean energy for our port operations. So when it comes to sustainability, we have a whole other team that works on it. That's kind of where my lingo goes and stops with sustainability. But it's an initiative that we've taken on just because it's the right thing to do. Nobody's telling us to do this. We're just doing it because, again, we want to do the right thing. And last slide is just kind of a quick little takeaway here. Again, most modern gateway, we were the fastest growing US port in 2021 by percentage. We grew by over 25%. We did invest and are currently investing $1.3 billion in gateway investments, and again, our net zero carbon emissions. So with that, I think I went a minute or two over, but thank you so much for your time and being able to participate today.
Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I want to talk about exports. We've talked a lot about imports. One of the biggest issues that exporters have had over the last 2.5 years is getting equipment. You mentioned that there's a 17-day dwell time on containers coming off the port before you get them back. That obviously is going to contribute greatly to getting containers for export. On the West Coast, agriculture isn't able to export their products because they can't get containers. Often as well, the ships that would have gone up the West Coast north to pick up in Washington, Oregon, Northern California are going straight back to China with equipment that is much more lucrative to go load up there rather than wait to load up those containers for export with agriculture. They'd rather just send them back empty. What is happening on the East Coast in terms of empty containers? I mean, obviously they're not going to be available if they're out for 17 days. But you as a port, I feel, are much more able to help with the situation, especially due to your own chassis. That's one issue. Containers aren't coming back because they can't get chassis to bring them back to the port. A lot of ports aren't taking the empty containers because they're so congested with full containers. So I'm wondering if you could generally talk about available of empties, ease of export for exporters, and especially what your port is doing in comparison to other ports.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question. It's been a real challenge for the exporters for sure. I will say, going back about a year, I think it was a lot more prevalent. It's still an issue now, but I think it was a lot more prevalent about a year ago. We are, as a port, relatively even with our imports and our exports, just about a 50-50 split. We did see last year that shifted and our exports did drop. When we just looked at recent numbers, they did come back up and we are hitting that level 50-50-ish again number, which is nice to see. A lot of our exports, though, we don't have in the Port of Virginia that population density like you see in the New York area. So actually 34% of our volume was in and out on the rail. So the Midwest is actually a real big market for us. And that's where we do see a lot of our ags and a lot of our ag come in for export. And we heard the challenges even there, again, going back to getting bookings from the inland areas, that it's not, as a port, we don't control the empties as much as you would think. The steamship lines really, it's their equipment, it's their asset. So at the end of the day, excuse me, where they're going to say the equipment goes, that's where the equipment is going to go. We do have the ability and we have the matrix where it empties. Again, it's controlled by the steamship lines, but they can be returned back to the terminals, or we do have an off-terminal depot. We have Piners Point Container Yard. So depending on where the steamship lines are routing that, there are those options there. But I'm encouraged to see that I am feeling that balance is coming back. But for a while there, it was definitely difficult. I had a lot of customers calling about trying to get those empties, but yeah.
Okay, great. That's very informative and interesting to hear about the fact that Norfolk is a strong exporter from the Midwest. We don't think about the interconnectivity between different parts of the country going on in the ports. So again, we're running a bit behind, so I'll keep it to one question. Again, I want to appreciate or express my appreciation for a very informative presentation, and thanks for answering my question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Back to Susan.
Actually, Lanier is going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much. Lanier Robbins of the Global Chamber of Miami. Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us today for this Cross Metro webinar. I'm Lanier Robbins, the director of the Global Chamber of Miami. I'd like to give a special thanks to my colleagues, Susan and Mijong, for organizing this event, and to our great lineup of speakers, including Senator Cardin for sharing his insights. As we've heard so far, this is a critical topic, and it's important to know what is happening across our ports in the region. So I have the absolute pleasure of introducing our next speaker, James Butcher. He is the marketing and sales representative of the Jacksonville Port Authority, otherwise known as JAXPort. And James will share important information about what is happening at JAXPort. I'd also like to talk about James's background. He's the former president of Hogue Autoliners Incorporated. He's the former CEO and chairman of Port Dolphin Energy LLC, and adjunct professor at State University of New York Maritime College, and former president of the Maritime Association of the Port of New Jersey and New York. James graduated from the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy and Long Island University with an MBA. He has experience in all phases of vessel operations, CP performance, PI matters, and commercial matters relating to RORO and container trades. So without further ado, Mr. James Butcher, welcome.
Thank you very much, Lynette. And thank you everybody for having us here today and me. I'd like to thank the Global Chamber for running this meeting today, as well as Senator Cardin and Nicole and Tara. Thank you very much. It's been very informative so far. Jacksonville is known as JAXPort, and we like to say that X marks the spot. And the reason we say that is because of the fact that we actually live on the corner of I-95 and I-10, two of the major interstates serving the U.S. And we're only 1 hour east from I-75, which is proceeding from there on up to Detroit. From Jacksonville, we're serving 140 ports worldwide, and we have 3 container terminals, plus a passenger cruise facility, and also automobile terminals. There are 2 major railroads which are serving Jacksonville, which are the CSX and the Norfolk Southern. And we have 2 rail facilities on dock and near dock, and plenty of trucking capabilities. And I guess that the biggest thing that I'm probably going to say to you this morning is that unlike some of our other ports around, Jacksonville is very fortunate at this point in that we do not have any congestion, either on the terminals or waiting with ships. If we could have the next slide. This is a pretty, wow, wrong slide. All right. Florida is now the 3rd most populous state in the U.S. with a population in Northeast Florida of 1.8 million. And by 2045, it's supposed to be increasing by 29%. Jacksonville is the 3rd most populous city in the U.S. with 938,000 people. And by the way, Jacksonville is the largest city in America with by area, that is, actually. You can see those 8 counties plus Alachua are the counties which are comprising the Jacksonville Foreign Trade Zone number 64, which is busy serving the public with cost savings. Try the next slide. All right, this is a chart which is showing the St. Johns River on which the Port of Jacksonville sits. The St. Johns River is one of only 2 rivers in the Northern Hemisphere which is actually flowing northward. The other one is the Nile. We have 3 terminals in Jacksonville: the Blount Island Marine Terminal, which is sitting 12 miles from the sea buoy, the Dames Point Marine Terminal, which is 1 mile further on from that, and then if you proceed on downtown to the Talleyrand Marine Terminal. Each of these terminals are owned by the Port Authority, but just as Nicole had mentioned, we are for New York, we are a landlord port, and therefore on each of these terminals there are containers, terminal operators and stevedores who are operating the terminals. Proceed on. Florida has 13 deep water ports. It's not like many other states. However, within Florida, Jacksonville is by far the biggest container port. We're doing this year 1.4 million TEUs. We've had 4 consecutive years of double-digit growth in the Asian trade. You should understand that 15 years ago, Jacksonville really didn't have a trans-Pacific container trade. It was basically Puerto Rico, and that's about it. Jacksonville has been known as Puerto Rico Central, and as a matter of fact, 80% of the cargo that goes to Puerto Rico still goes through Jacksonville. But we have grown especially the trans-Pacific trades in those years since, and it has now become a pretty big, important part of our operation. That and vehicles. Jacksonville is trailing behind Baltimore as the biggest port for handling automobiles, both new and used, and it's a big part of our business. We are the number 11 port in the US as far as container handling, and the number 1 port as far as Puerto Rico is concerned. So we can move on then and show that this is the pie chart showing the mix of Jacksonville business. As you can see, 53% container, and out of that 53%, probably about 66% of it is Puerto Rico. So that's the balance of it is mostly Trans-Pacific. And cars is a big part of our business. We're almost 50-50 when it comes to import and export mix, 60-40, and that, just as Tara had mentioned, that has changed a little bit over the past year or so. So we can move on. Last month, Jacksonville announced that in fact we had completed our harbor deepening project to 47 feet. Jacksonville now has 47 feet coming from the sea buoy all the way up through the Blunt Island Marine Terminal, which is our biggest container terminal. That Blunt Island Terminal, as you can see it there, has on the west side or left side a couple of car berths as well. So we do containers and cars on Blunt Island, and that's where is located the biggest of our container terminal operators, which is SSA Atlantic, which is located right there. That yellow line, which is coming straight down the middle, is I-295 and crosses over the St. Johns River, and that marks the furthest extension of the 47 feet draft, which we have now. After that, it becomes 40 feet through the Dames Point Terminal and all the way down to Talleyrand. The Dames Point Terminal has recently been taken over by a new operator, Series Marine Terminals, and they are also developing that terminal very well. There are consortia located at each of those 2 terminals. At the Blunt Island Marine Terminal, at the SSA terminal, is the 2M with Maersk and MSC and Zim. And over at the Dames Point Marine Terminal is the Alliance with ONE and Yangming and a couple of others. So let's proceed. This is just a quick list of some of the distribution locations that are in the Jacksonville area. Jacksonville is not as big as some of the other ports which are located further up the coast. They have started a little bit earlier in getting distribution centers. However, it's important to understand that Jacksonville and the Central Florida area and the area that we have reached to is very, very important as far as importation is concerned. Sorry. I think it's important that we should mention that the amount of trade that's coming in and out of our country is large. It was large before COVID struck, and it's going to be growing even more. Even before COVID happened, there were people who were pointing out that, in fact, trade was going to be tripling in this country. Inbound and outbound was going to be tripling between the beginning of the century and 20, 30, or 40. And that still is the case. And what has happened is that when the recent supply chain disruptions happened, it didn't all of a sudden become a new phenomenon. The terminals were basically pretty much all full already, and what that has made it just worse. So what I'd like to comment is that I think that there's going to be plenty of room for all of the ports. The pie is getting bigger, and as a matter of fact, we need all of the ports to be doing all they can, rather than bickering with each other if that's what they choose to do. Jacksonville would like to do our part. And for the time being, we are very fortunate in that we do not have any congestion, 0 on the terminals or ships waiting to get in. And that's availability for containers as well with the major consortia. They have plenty of containers available. And as a member of the Southeast Chassis Pool, chassis are not a problem as well. We can say, why is that? And we would like to recommend to all importers that they use Jacksonville. Maybe we should move on. Why should people use Jacksonville? Strategic location. Who was it? Tara or Nicole had a slide that showed how many millions of people you could reach within 36 or 48 hours from the port. Every port has a similar slide like that, and we have ours as well. You can reach 98 million Americans within one day's truck driving. No congestion, seamless transportation with our interstate railroads and with the interstate highways and railroads. 40 trains a day, more than 100 trucking and drayage firms reaching to the U.S. Southeast, the Mississippi and Ohio, river valleys, and also the Midwest. Room to grow. There's plenty of land in the Jacksonville area, and there are speculators building warehousing and distribution center possibilities as we speak, and we're very bullish on that. Quick boost for the free trade zone number 64, which is helping our importers quite a bit. Expertise. Jacksonville is a military town, by the way. There's plenty of military activity there, and there are plenty of servicemen and ladies who are separating every year from the military who choose to stay living in Jacksonville. The city is growing rather rapidly. The point being there that there's plenty of expert labor in the port, and we're very proud of that. Jacksonville is, when one thinks of Florida, perhaps you think about certain demographics about up in the state, northern part of the state, southern. Jacksonville is very, very cosmopolitan. And part of the reason for that is because of the military. Investment, there has been quite a bit of investment going on in the Jacksonville area over the past few years, $2.5 billion in terminals, and plans to infuse more than $2.6 billion in additional improvements over the next 5 years. So that's why Jacksonville. And the last slide is only a picture, I think. That's what we look like. There's the car ships in the background. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Again, our running theme is we're behind schedule, so I'm going to do just one question again. As opposed to quite a few other ports, you did mention you do have room to grow. How is that uniquely situating you to be competitive against the coast up the port that you compete with?
To be competing what?
In terms of room to grow, you have much more of an opportunity to grow than, say, for example, New York, as they discussed. They're quite hemmed in by the development around them. Where do you see the greatest room to grow, and how is that going to help the supply chain exporters and importers?
It's a complicated subject. Why, in fact, there is no congestion in Jacksonville while there is in some other ports, and how we're addressing that. The fact is that steamship companies, believe it or not, are in business to make money, and what they try and do is minimize the number of ports they're calling if possible. So if you as a BCO were to go to a steamship company and say, it would be really, really nice if you could go to Jacksonville and get my cargo as opposed to going somewhere else, the steamship companies sometimes would say, well, that would be very nice, but frankly, we can't really afford it because we can't add another port onto the rotation. And so therefore, you'll have to wait. We are in the process of alleviating that by building up new distribution centers and warehousing capabilities, which are in some cases for spec, in some cases designed. And there is plenty of room for that to be done, and it's going to take time. It's going to take time, but at the same time, the amount of cargo that's coming in and out of this country is going to be increasing dramatically over the next couple of decades, and all of the ports are going to be taxed, no doubt about it. I believe we need a national policy for infrastructure improvement, which treats everybody kind of equally and develops our infrastructure as we're going to need it. I hope that may answer.
It did. Thank you very much. And again, thank you for your informative presentation. I am going to pass it back to Susan, and hopefully I'm correct this time.
Thank you, but I think we have a little more time, right? We have till 15 minutes after. Is that correct, Mijong?
the panel.
That's correct. We can have open, the Q&A, and then there are quite a few questions actually in the chat box to each panelist. So, Steve, would you mind asking those questions?
Absolutely. And so that concludes the individual presentation period. And now we're going to open it up to a general discussion, including all three simultaneously, to try to get some various opinions on the same question. And I want to start off with one of our questions from our chat box from the folks that are listening. There is a general feeling right now, especially since Target canceled some major orders in the last couple of days, that there is a big drop in imports happening currently. And this is feeding from also the recession fears and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of folks think that the ports are just suddenly clearing up. And I wanted to get an answer from all three ports on that feeling.
Yeah, so when we're looking at our forecasting, the volumes are still looking strong right now. But what you're hearing when you're reading all these articles is everything's coined as having the wrong inventory. So a lot of these DCs are currently full, but they're full with their, last year's stuff that finally made it in. So it's, again, creating just this snowball effect of what's the challenge with the whole supply chain right now. We're currently looking at still a double-digit growth in volume for this year. But when we're talking with economists looking for the future, we feel that starting 2023, 2024, you'll go back down to like a 4% year-over-year growth. So we had 25% year-over-year, 20 to 21. We'll hit around 10% this year, and then we're expecting it to still be about 4% moving forward. So I think that you might see a little bit of a lull coming in. People I'm talking to, it seems like June has this little bit of a lull, and then it ramps back up again come peak. So I definitely don't think we're out of the woods in regards to a lot of the volume coming in. But like you had mentioned, I think we're having a little bit of a breathing room, and anything you can get right now helps in trying to clear out a bit.
I can endorse totally Tara what your comments were as well.
I agree with Tara. In the beginning of this pandemic, we saw like a hockey stick. We went from nothing to a surge of cargo coming in. And we are reading about the same thing and seeing the future. Yes, there's going to be a little slowing down, but once we get back into our normal seasonality cargo, when schools start getting into school supplies, Christmas supplies, we will see an increase. But we still, for New York and New Jersey, will still have an increase over last year.
Lanier, would you like to, I'm sorry, not Lanier, anyone else would like to comment on that? No, I would like to do a follow-up question. You mentioned school in the industry, we often call this peak season, which is it starts with school, then goes to Christmas gifts coming in. Although I've been doing this for 26 years, and I've noticed the peak season has gotten longer and longer and longer until there's not really a peak season anymore. But this year, a lot of folks are talking about trying to get ahead of the peak season on imports, and I wonder if you're starting to see the peak season maybe even starting already, and this lull that you talk about will just be very short.
No, I don't think that we've seen any change so far. It's been kind of pedal to the metal since quite a while now, and we're if there's going to be more of a peak, I don't know where it's going to go to. Okay.
Next question from the chat box. I actually just came back from about a week ago. I was in Newport News for a conference that centered around the military and military logistics, and included a lot of industry partners. And obviously, in that kind of environment, security in the ports was top of mind. And one of the participants has asked about security in the ports and what is being done to continually address evolving threats. And I'm wondering if anyone would like to respond to that. That you could talk about.
Sure. I know each of the terminal operators, their technology is so important and they protect it. So updating technology, being on top of what's going on and protecting, any hacks or anything that would come in to affect the terminal shutting down. So as far as security, obviously we have security at every gate, but you mean technology wise, yeah, they're being protected by each terminal are taking on their own hands to protect, to make sure that nothing stops the fluidity of the gateways and nothing can come into their, security wise. And we saw even with customs, there was a shortness of people being shifted around, but we now see that we're back almost to being, customs customs checking all the containers out. We're back to our normal presence on the terminals.
Yeah, I echo that. Customs definitely obviously is huge on the water side of things and on the terminal side. But when you're talking about the operating systems, and it comes even to us too as employees and getting emails and opening up a wrong link. So we're constantly getting training even on the employee side about looking out for phishing attempts and the best practices for us to be doing internally on our side. And we have a very, very in-depth security team that's monitoring all of that as well. So yeah, a lot of security across the board.
Yeah, we don't have the luxury that we used to have, where we could be kind of fast and loose as far as security is concerned. So there's a little bit more effort that has to be put into it daily. And it's a little bit more of a hassle, but it's just something that we have to do. And I think as with many things in modern life here, nobody likes wearing face masks, but we just have to, just the way it is. And we're doing it.
Okay, thank you very much. Another topical question from Chatbox. What are your ports in particular doing about climate change and sea level rise? And what do you think is needed outside of your particular port in terms of a national reaction? Obviously, you're right on the front line, literally. So what are you doing and what do you need? Because you can't do it by yourselves, right?
I guess I'll start because I hit it on that a little bit in my presentation. But it is something we've seen it. California is very big with doing sustainability efforts. But it's something on the East Coast that, again, it's not being enforced yet on any kind of mandate level. So we're trying to get a little bit ahead of that even and just doing the right thing and trying to be, especially you're seeing a lot of your big BCOs and a lot of shippers, everybody's paying attention to the environment right now. And a lot of them are working sustainability into their initiatives and their goals. So for us, by doing it on our side as well, we can also collaborate and say, hey, you're trying to do your part. We're doing our part as well. And now when you're talking about being a good scope 3 partner, I can control what I can control. I'm outside of your scope. I'm a scope 3 to you. But since I'm being a good citizen, now I'm a strong partner for you in your supply chain and overall reducing your carbon footprint. So I think, again, like we're also working on electric dray studies and seeing what we can be doing in regards to electric drayage. A lot of different things going on in that space. But yeah, I do agree. It's something that I think, especially with your shippers now, you're seeing a lot more attention across the board. So I think that's only going to continue to grow.
Sure. Well, there's a difference between operating ports and landlord ports in this as well. And as landlord ports, we depend upon the activities of our terminal operators for a lot of this and the ocean carriers that are coming in. In the particular case of Jacksonville, we're proud that we've taken a real leading stance in the LNG business. We have 2 LNG providers for fuel in Jacksonville, and we've had many ocean carriers who have come to our port for the purpose of looking at what we can do and started taking their bunkers in Jacksonville. We're pushing the LNG hard.
We are, I mean, we are a landlord port as well, so we rely on the terminal operators, and they are doing their due diligence. We're working on the Port Authority side on getting EV vehicles for our workers that need to go around the facilities, and we're making it, like Jim said, for the ocean carriers to come in easier to come here on the electrifying side.
Okay, thank you very much. That's very interesting approaches to that question. One other question from the chat box is more for Tara, I would say, since you brought up technology as such a key part of your success. Their question is, do you develop your own technology, or do you go for off-the-shelf solutions, or do you partner with outside technology providers? He's just curious about how that works.
Yeah, no, we do not develop any of our own. It is with outside providers and partners. We just work to basically take that and we use that information to make like really critical data-driven decisions. So we are just using a lot of different technology and providers to drive that information that we're using and be able to push information back out to our customers as well. We have API connectivity that we can offer now, so we can feed container milestones directly into customers' operating systems. So different things with that we can, again, customers can come to us and say, hey, this KPI is important to me. Can you feed that milestone into my system, or can you generate a report that would show me that information? And these are all conversations that we can have now. So it's not developing any kind of technology on our side, it's just using it.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. I think we're pretty much gotten ourselves on schedule at this point. Maybe about 30 seconds left for the panel. So I'm gonna ask a really quick moderator choice question. A lot of folks think that the East Coast is a solution for the congestion on the West Coast. Any quick answer on that? I know how I would answer that, but how would you answer that?
Yes, yes, it is. We have a new service now that's coming in from China to Norfolk, railing to LAX, because the West Coast is just to avoid coming in there. It's easier for them to come in over us and rail it across the country. Everybody, I think, can agree. We've seen a huge shift in the volume, and we're all doing what we can to handle it. We're ready for it. We want it. Bring it to Virginia, and that's it. Yeah.
But ask that question in 10 or 15 years, and you may have a little bit of a different answer. The world is going to be changing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, that's a great way to end the panel. The world is definitely changing, and I'm really glad that we've got such great folks to help us adapt and overcome, as they say in the military. So thank you very much, and I'm going to pass it over to Susan for concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Stephen. That was a fabulous moderation. The presentations were great. Everyone was on their feet about addressing the issues presented. So thank you also, Stephen, to Emotrans for hosting the Baltimore, Washington part of this. I'd also like to extend a special thank you again to Andrew Howlett, who is with Corpay and hosted the New York City portion. Thank you so much. And we were all delighted to have the opening comments from the Senator Ben Cardin, thanks to Mijong. And also, we neglected to thank Larry Brill, who's the deputy executive with Mijong in the Baltimore, Washington office. And Larry has been involved since the beginning with Lanier and I planning this meeting. So thank you, Larry. I'd like to give a very special thanks to Nicole Polidoro, because without her, we probably would not have met Terry Mom and Jim Butcher, because of the way the three ports work together, Nicole was able to get us that introduction. So thank you to that again. We really touched on a lot of great topics, including sustainability, the environment, credit risk, capacity. We learned about operating ports and landlord ports, and about these great states that we have around this country, and how we are helping importers and exporters. And we have a lot of that population in the Global Chamber membership. So who knows, maybe Tara's going to get some inquiries from tech companies, Nicole will get some inquiries about how she can work with, how people can work in New York, New Jersey port. So, and we all want to come to Florida. So we'll all come to Jacksonville. But anyway, one last thing I want to thank, obviously, once again, Mijong Hibbets and Lanier out of Miami, Lanier Robbins, for helping me coordinate and set up this meeting. And I want to acknowledge my advisory board members. One of them is Andrew Doug Went, who is in the room and who's been taking pictures. Bob Dunphy, who also is there, and Danielle Orcott, who's with Corpay and recently is agreed to become on the New York City Advisory Board, and Nicole again. So the recording of this Globinar will be sent to all the attendees. That usually happens about a week out. And if anyone on this call wants to learn more about the Global Chamber, please feel free to reach out to either myself, Mijong, or Lanier. All of our emails are our first name at globalchamber.org. So if you have any questions about joining one of our chapters, we'd love to have you join. And just on the New York side, we will have another in-person meetup, hopefully on July 28th. That's what I'm looking for, to do a happy hour in New York. And I hope to be there. I wasn't there today. And without Andrew, this would have not happened. Thank you once again, Andrew, for allowing Corpay to host this. And I think that's it, unless Mijong or Lanier have anything else to say.
Yeah, I just echo, thank you very much for today's presentation. Excellent panelist and moderator Steve did a super job. And thank you everybody participating in person here as well as virtually. So would like to have the more informative discussions like this in coming months and weeks. So I'm looking forward to that as well. Lanier?
Yes, I echo my colleagues' comments, and also just want to mention how wonderful collaboration is. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to learn more about the various ports in our regions and to work with all of you. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Cesar. Bye.